This week on the Honor Roll podcast, we'll be talking to honor students Abigail Brake and Alison Frate and honors instructor Dr. Gregory Smogard about making a difference in business on an international scale. All that and more coming up next. Hey Honors Bulls! Welcome to the Honor Roll podcast, the flagship podcast of the Judy Genshaft Honors College Podcast Network. I'm your host, Caroline Merriman, a fourth-year student studying English and biology at the University of South Florida and a member of the Honors College. Today, my co-host is Fabiana Requena, a third-year student studying marketing and business analytics. Welcome back to the podcast, Fabi.
Thanks for having me, Caroline.
So this week, my one big question is, what is your dream company to work at? But the twist is it would have to be outside of the U.S.
So I feel like I don't necessarily have a dream company just because I'm trying to figure out what niche in marketing I'm trying to get into. But for sure, outside of the U.S., I would want to work in Spain, specifically like Barcelona or Madrid. I feel like I already know the language and the culture. I think it would be a good fit for me.
I think for me, I haven't necessarily thought about international scope in regards to like work or living, but I think like I would love to like do grad school abroad. I think that'd be really cool to like just see how, research and education are different somewhere else and what that would be like, plus you can sightsee on the weekend. So it's like, you're traveling and, doing whatever you have to do for work or school. Well, this week we'll be talking to honor students who worked with international businesses in the Student Consulting Capstone course with honors professor and entrepreneur Dr. Greg Smogard. And students Abigail Frate and Alison Brake will tell us about the importance of international exchange, course details, and the importance of learning in a global context. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Hammond. I am a senior in biomedical sciences. To be an honors student, I would say that academics is combined with real experience in the world. Like for my capstone research project, I was able to research medical literacy and get 2 national level publication presentations out of it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us on the podcast. Would each of you like to introduce yourself real quick?
I can start. I'm Greg Smogard. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Innovation Business Development on the Sarasota Manatee campus, and I teach the Student Consulting course.
Right. My name is Abby. I'm in my third year. I'm an applied and computational mathematics major, and I'm also minoring in global studies and education and film and new media studies.
Hi, I'm Alison Frate. I'm a fourth-year student on the Sarasota Manatee campus. I'm majoring in marketing, but I'm on the pre-law track, so I have plans to attend law school next year.
Well, we're so excited to have you guys on the podcast today and to hear your take on the Global Consulting course. But to start us off, Professor Smogard, could you tell us just a bit about the Global Student Consulting course that you lead?
Sure. It's basically a 3-credit online honors college capstone course. Typically, we have about 4 to 6 students on a team, and then we connect the teams with international companies or organizations. So that's kind of the setup. The course is run a little bit differently, and so maybe I'll take a couple minutes and explain how the course may be a little bit different from other courses. And start off, actually, what I do is I interview students before they even enroll to kind of let them know the course is different, answer their questions if they're interested in enrolling. Then I'll interview them a little bit more. And that provides me with a couple of options. One is to find out what their backgrounds are, their work experience, their skill sets. And it also helps me kind of decide what teams to put them on and also what kinds of projects we might want to work with when it comes to the international companies. And then from there, we kind of kick off the semester with a kickoff session. We do a critical thinking workshop. And we also assign roles and responsibilities. And so each student has a different role and responsibility. I think one thing that's interesting there, and I think Alison was the one who was the communication lead. And that's probably the most important role there, because what we want to do when I recruit companies is I want to make it the least labor intensive for the companies themselves, because they're very busy. And so we want to work with them. And so one of the things we do is we kind of make one of the students a point of contact. So they set up the meetings, they reach out, they provide updates. And so that's a particularly interesting role. And so that's one of the things we do at the very beginning of the course. I have them read a book which talks a little bit more about the structures of a consulting engagement, how a consulting engagement works. Since none of them are probably professional consultants, it's good to have some kind of structure at the beginning. And then basically we have only two major deliverables. One is the PowerPoint or oral presentation at the end of the semester where they present to the management team of the company, probably about 45 minutes. Then there's a Q&A session. And at the second part of it is they also put together a written report that they give to the company as well. And then during the semester, we mostly work on whiteboards. It's kind of like a consulting engagement where they do a lot of designing, debating, discussing, and outlining what the project works on there. And then at the very end, we do a little practice session before they actually pitch. I have a panel of colleagues that I bring to the group first before we actually do that, and they get to do a kind of a dress rehearsal. We do the pitch at the very end of the semester, and then we do course evaluations. I have the students evaluate the course. I have the clients evaluate the course, and then they also do a reflection paper. So that's kind of the way the course works. It's a little bit different. The grading's a little bit different. Everybody gets to grade each other, and so it's kind of a real-world, hands-on experience there. And I think Caroline at the beginning asked what was a little bit how long has the course been going. So this course has been going for about 5 years. We've done about 20-some projects now, and based on that, about half of them were local projects that we did with the local community, and the other half were international projects. And so I think we've had about 80 to maybe 90 students go through the course so far. So that's kind of an overview of the course.
Well, Professor Smogard, thank you so much for sharing all of that information. Sounds like a really hands-on course that is available here at the Honors College. Now, I want to hear a little bit from Abigail and Alison. When you initially signed up for the course, what drew you to want to take a course like this? I know you're a marketing major, but you're studying mathematics. What kind of drew you both to the course?
Well, I'll go first. What drew me to the course really was, again, that it was a real-world experience course. When I was looking at which capstone I wanted to take for the Honors College, I was really drawn to something that had real-world research involved in it. And so when I saw that this was a course with a real company, I was really excited to start interviewing with Dr. Smogard. And I also liked that it was a consulting course, just because I do want to go to law school down the road, and I find that there are crossovers between being a lawyer and kind of a consultant, so it was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. So, again, that it's a very unique type of capstone course, and so a lot of the others sort of resemble more of the other honors courses that are offered at USF. But I wanted something that had something more tangible, like both in my impact that I'm creating and then also the effects that it's having on me. And so coming from a math background, I was hoping to sort of integrate some sort of data analysis into the project. And this became something that a couple of us actually on the team were able to integrate. And it's something that the company also was really interested in as well. It drove the presentation just that little bit further to where they can see the actual numbers and our projections on how this could have impacted the project.
I'll actually follow up on something Abby said in terms of she used the term impact. And that's a question I get a lot from students when they're talking about the course in terms of, so what do these companies do? And we do all this research, we put together all these projects and present to them. Do they actually use them? And I can tell you that when I look at the referrals and the references and also the evaluations at the end of the class, I would say that the vast majority of the companies and organizations use a good bit of the recommendations and the outcomes that the students present. So it does have a real world impact on these companies.
Abby and Allison, I did want to ask you guys, what was your project like specifically addressing? What were you guys designing? What was that, what was your actual project? What did it look like?
So our project was mainly based towards natural disaster resilience of the country of the Philippines as a whole. But again, as Abby mentioned earlier, the company themselves wanted us to focus more on rural areas rather than urban. So I, for example, did a lot of research myself on mangrove rehabilitation and growth and natural seawall barriers. So I took a huge deep dive into, how do mangroves survive? What's the best practices here? What types even are there? And are there better types that we could be using? And I looked at past projects, such as the area of Thailand. I looked at a project that was successful. And then I also did research into what the Philippines was currently doing with other companies that had invested money, why those projects necessarily didn't work. And then as Dr. Smogard said, looking at best practices, we kind of developed like a game plan if this company was to go in and invest money in mangrove rehabilitation and growth and natural seawalls, because we did a lot of research as well on concrete seawalls versus bamboo-based seawalls. And again, looking at that rural aspect versus urban, we did find that the bamboo seawalls were a lot more beneficial and return on investment wise a lot better to invest in those areas rather than the concrete. So it was a huge deep dive into research, and I was just going and finding new things from each little bit that I was discovering each day.
I think what unified what I was focusing on and what Allison focused on was green infrastructure. And so this company focused a lot on sustainability. So whatever we propose, is it going to improve the environment over time, or is it eventually going to cause more negative impacts than positive impacts? And so what I focused on then was, so obviously with a high amount of typhoons and oversaturation of the ground, there's going to be an increased likelihood of landslides. And so I was focusing on a green infrastructure approach to strengthen certain slopes around the Philippines, especially in places that are more vulnerable, whether that's because of deforestation or just the slopes are steeper in these certain areas. And so I found examples from Nepal and from India where they actually used bamboo cribs. And so they laid down bamboo on these slopes in certain patterns. And over a really short amount of time, actually, these slopes were covered with vegetation. And before these cribs were placed, they had nothing on them. And so actually over time, as this vegetation roots deeper and deeper into the ground, that slope is going to become stronger and stronger and more resilient to landslides. And so, as I said, that kind of goes back to how our projects at least came together, was focusing on nature-based infrastructure. And that was something that the company found really interesting as well.
And one thing they did that was very effective too, they actually got photos, and so before and after photos, which I think is always very impactful. So the client would be able to see it's not a theoretical concept, it's actually best practice, and here's what it looked like before, here's what it looked like after, and very impactful.
Each of you have kind of touched on like the real world impact and like the experiences that you get from this course kind of being the driving force behind, why you took it on, in your course schedule. Did the course compare to your expectations once you guys kind of got into like the meat of the course and into like the actual consulting activities?
I would say it exceeded my expectations. I was expecting, as Dr. Smogard explained it, it was definitely a deep research course, but it really was interesting meeting with the clients every couple of weeks and hearing what they needed and what they kind of wanted us to look deeper into. And I really fell in love with the research, and that just helped to go deeper and deeper into what we were kind of trying to help them with, which really made the course more enjoyable to me firsthand, but also I really liked the fact that we were handing them deliverables that they would potentially use to impact and help the country that we were working with.
Yeah, I agree. I think I definitely didn't expect to feel so attached to it. We spent like a whole semester developing this as a team and spending a lot of time in and out of class meeting together and developing this. And so at the end, it was kind of like I had a really deep attachment to it. Like this was like our project. And I think that was something that I maybe less expected, just because you don't really see that in some of the other classes that you can take.
Along those same lines, Allison, I'm also a marketing major. How do you feel it compares to like our College of Business classes?
I feel it's one step further in the sense that they take it to a real company, just because a lot of my business classes do involve simulated versions of consulting.
Right.
And I did see the parallels there. But what I really liked is that it was just, again, that one step further, where we were meeting with the company and we were hearing really what they would like us to work on. And instead of reading that, usually we read it in a breakdown when we do our simulations. We were actually meeting with them. It was a 12-hour time difference. So as the communications lead, I really had to work, to schedule our meetings at certain times. And some days we were meeting at 8 p.m. at night because it was 8 a.m. there. But it was really interesting to me to be able to organize that and, have the correspondence back and forth and then go and set up the meeting notes and meet with the company. And it really did exceed my expectations. I greatly enjoyed it. And as an honors student, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to take the class, because I feel like it did enrich, again, that business marketing background that I am beginning to gain.
With this course like being so such a different approach from, what a lot of the other business courses and marketing courses are. What inspired you to design the course this way?
Well, most of my experience has been in the business world. So I've had the opportunity of working with Fortune 400 companies, Fortune 500 companies, traveled around the world. I've worked with projects in 40 some countries. So I felt pretty comfortable with that. I've also been an entrepreneur and a consultant. So what I want to do is bring that into the classroom and really see if I could put together a real hands-on, real-world, high-impact kind of experience for the students. And so by putting that together, I felt that it was really, like we talked about, the high impact, make a difference. It's also really important, I think, to give the students an opportunity to leverage their existing skills and apply them to a project, because I think sometimes they have a lot of skill sets, they have a lot of great work experience, and said, okay, let's see if we can apply that, and plus develop some new skills for their careers moving forward. So I think all those were important. And then I think probably one of the biggest ones, and I'll let Abby and Allison talk a little bit more about that, but actually having exposure to global executives and being able to talk to them, kind of get a sense of all the different cultures and languages and all the different aspects of working internationally are all very important. So I think that is kind of probably one of the more unique characteristics of actually face-to-face interaction with global executives. I think is probably one of the more driving factors for the course as well.
For the students, what characteristics, like Dr. Smogard was saying, do you feel that you were able to develop with skill sets?
I would say presenting something so large and having it fit within the time span that they were wanting, and also the time limit for the presentation, and really bringing in all of this research that again was from so many of our different backgrounds. And so Allison is marketing, I'm math, we had an English major, biology, computer science, and so kind of bringing all of that together, valuing everyone's skill sets, and then turning it into something that can potentially be very high impact.
Yeah, I agree. And going off of that, Dr. Smogard, you did an amazing job finding that team, because we really were a well-rounded group of students. So because you have to be interviewed in order to join the class, it was very well put together with individuals that from all different backgrounds kind of helped add a little bit to each section of the project. So, being a business marketing major, and we had people that were a little bit better at maybe the data analytics than I might have been, and I took the communications lead because that was something I felt a little bit more comfortable doing myself. So it made the project just ease a little bit nicer, and the final project that we created, again, it was just very well put together because of that.
Yeah, I'll say, Allison, thanks for bringing that up. I think the multidisciplinary aspect is important too. I think one of the things I've kind of learned in my career, and also I learned in this course as I go through it myself, is that my personal experience is multidisciplinary teams really come up with some really dynamic, robust ideas, and there's a chance of different perspectives coming together. And I think that's very important. But since you talked about student engagement, what they learned, I'm going to turn it back to you, Carolyn, because I know back a couple years ago, you and I were on the same class, and we did our first virtual global exchange with a university in Colombia, Uninorte, and I know that it was kind of a little bit different than the class that I teach with the student consultant, but it's very similar in many ways. And so I'm curious to see what your experience was in that particular class, because that was more of an entrepreneur, but we're fitting into something that they were already had kind of in process. And so it was a little bit different, but I'm curious to see how your experience was with that.
I think that process was really interesting because we were brought into a space where the initial product was thought of. And so we're brought into on this product design, project design kind of phase. And, the teams were kind of, similar. We had this team of, an accounting major and a communications major and marketing and someone else who was analytics. And it was really cool to work with a team of students from Columbia and marry our strengths with their strengths. And, I think in the end, our project took so many different forms. Our end product was so different from our beginning product. But you do go through this journey, where we're leading the project ourselves. You gave us so much guidance, but at the same time, we had agency over what we were doing. And in the end, we had control, just as an entrepreneur would have. You're making decisions that no one can really tell you if it's right or wrong. And you have to kind of go into that and knowing that, you might have to creatively problem solve later. And I think that's what, I took away myself, but what a lot of people in our group took away was having the ability to trust yourself, but also having the faith that it'll work out, because you're learning to use those creative problem solving skills and you're learning to do research and kind of navigate around those things. And I think that's what I really took away from the bulk of the course.
And I think, though, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's one of the things I try to encourage that up front is that they're empowered to kind of design
Mhm.
the project the way they want. And my role is to kind of provide some kind of guidance and be a catalyst. But at the end of the day, that's the other thing that I think that the outcomes and what they present is one thing, but the process that they go through, I think to
Mhm.
me is almost more important than the actual outcome,
Absolutely.
because that's exactly what I was hoping to accomplish with this is that you guys are in charge and let's see what you can put together.
Yes, and adding to that, what something I feel was very unique to this project in itself was that the deliverable expectation was left completely open at the
Mhm.
beginning of the semester. So, where some companies will come in and say, "We'd like you to add to this," or "We're working on this project," I mean, Abby will agree with me, and maybe could add a little bit.
Absolutely.
But we really were told, like, be as creative as possible with this. We want to hear what you can come up with. And it was for a country as a whole, really. So it was a huge, huge pool of things that we could pull from and delve into. And that, I think, was a huge challenge and very exciting endeavor at the beginning of the semester because, I mean, we were really like, what do we want to start with? And we had so
Mhm.
many ideas, and Dr. Smogard was very helpful each week with helping us kind of pick which ones we want to run with because we have a big project to present at the end of the semester here, and we're just going and going and going on all of these things that are coming to our minds. And it was a lot, but it was very exciting because we really got to turn it into where we would like to take it, and I feel that's why the project ended up so wonderfully done.
Yeah, I agree. The autonomy is like definitely scary, but it was so exciting because that's how we became like so invested in this project because we really were there from the initial idea generation. So we spent a lot of our first couple of sessions just thinking like, what are we interested in that this company does? And then we got to take that in whatever direction we chose. And as I said, it's scary because like you said, you can't know if it's the right or wrong direction.
Yeah.
But Dr. Smogard and then the team that we were paired with were really great at directing us, sort of using our own interests, but directing us in a way that it would align with the company goals.
I think it can be scary because sometimes we underestimate ourselves as students, having
Mhm.
like limited experience and just starting out in our careers. But we do have a lot of potential, and I feel like with a good leader and the right direction, like we can really accomplish a lot of things.
I'm glad you brought that up too, because what happens a lot, and when I read the evaluations, I look, okay, because each course and everything's very unique. Everything is very different each time we do this. But one of the things that comes up is confidence building as well, in terms of at the beginning, I'm not sure, I don't have business experience, I don't have this experience, and then we get into it, and like they were mentioning, it's not very structured at the beginning, and they're empowered. Where are we going to go? But at the very end, I hear a lot of, wow, this thing came together, and it really gave me a lot more confidence in terms of working with it. I know we can pull it together and actually deliver something that's really has a high impact. And so that's another one that comes up a lot. So
And going off of that, especially at the beginning of the project, something that most honors courses, in my opinion, this was a little different from, is that Dr. Smogard specifically told us, like, we're going to take a slow approach. We, as honor students, we like to hit the ground running and, really get going. But it was very well known that we need to slow down. And I like that difference in this class because I'm not used to doing that as like a high achieving student. I'm used to like just running and running and running and working quickly kind of with projects. And it was a good learning experience to really take our time in the beginning and slowly develop each idea and take steps back and really like start from the beginning with everything to make sure that where we're going to go when things pick up is exactly what we would like to be doing.
Could you guys just go into the process of, what is it like to pair students with the international companies? How does that partnership kind of form, and how do you assign, a certain group to a certain company?
well, it kind of goes back to what I said at the very beginning when I do the interviews.
Mhm.
It's very important for them, number one, to know what they're getting into. And sometimes they don't know what they're getting into. They just sign up and they don't know what the project is. They don't know what country they're going to be working with. And so it's up to me then to kind of curate all that. And so what I do is I look at the backgrounds. Sometimes when I recruit companies, I'll know in advance because one of the first questions they'll ask me is, so where are we going to work? What are we going to work on? And what
Mhm.
companies and what are we going to do? And I may not have an answer. So in that case, I can use the interviews I do with the students to say, okay, this looks like a kind of a cluster of skill sets that they'll be interested in. And I ask them the same questions in the interview. What are you interested in? What would you like to work with? And I can see if I can help. When I talk to the companies, I can also kind of prep the company, say, okay, I've got these kind of teams with these kinds of backgrounds, so maybe we can work on this kind of a project. And sometimes I already know the project, and then I have to take a look at the students' backgrounds and say, okay, what's the right mix of multidisciplinary skill sets to see if we can execute on that project. So each one is very unique and distinct, but it comes down to the interview process at the very beginning, and then after that, I negotiate with the companies as well, and so that's why it's important to interview and get to know them even before they enroll, and then after they enroll, get to make sure that I can pair them up as much as possible. Sometimes I can't always ideally put them on the team that they would love, but I think in most cases we have done a pretty good job of being able to match them up.
It's like a little job interview.
It really is.
Really.
Hello, Bulls! My name is Jacob Ramirez. I sing and play guitar for the Judy Genshaft Honors College Contemporary Music Ensemble. Go ahead and listen to our Fall 2024 live recording session out on YouTube now.
So I wanted to move on to the student projects. I want to move into kind of like your perspective on working through the consulting projects. What kind of challenges, business challenges did your teams tackle?
Well, one challenge that I found we kept going back to was just figuring out, because this is a real project again, like we asked the company on multiple occasions how much money or, what resources are available for each idea that we're coming up with, because again, it is a real project. So we wanted to try and figure all that out as much as we could when we end up presenting it. But as we soon learned, working with real business executives at the organization, that's not really something that's always feasible, to give a number or say, oh, we have this available. We often found them saying, well, what is the project? What are you pitching? And then we would be, we're halfway through it. We're not necessarily sure exactly what our final project is yet. So that was a big obstacle, was just figuring out what we can kind of work with as students, because at the end of the day, we're not professional consultants and we're not with the company. So how can we help them without having every single thing answered that we would like to know off the bat?
I think another thing is that we had to sort of consider what the values of the overall company was, and then also the values of the branch of the company. And so the company that we were paired with, they have different hubs around the world, and we were specifically paired with one. And so we had to sort of learn what is really valued in this area. So something that we came to have to sort of adjust is, do they want something that's more tailored to urban areas or rural areas? So in the end, it ended up being a little bit more local leaning. And so that was something that we had to readjust the scope of our project, is something like, how can we really measure the impact that this is having on individuals in these communities? How do they like the implementation of this project? Do they think it's beneficial? Do they think it gets in the way? That sort of thing. And so that was definitely a learning experience, trying to adjust what we thought was going to be valuable at the beginning to what actually this company was looking for directly.
I'm curious, organizationally, how did you start the project? I'm assuming that you guys had to have some sort of timeline to get everything done. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, that kind of goes back to taking a step back and really slowing down, because our timeline wasn't necessarily fully outlined to us, and that was kind of the beauty of this project. It was wherever we felt we needed to go each week in order to progress. But we definitely started by doing a lot of whiteboarding and brainstorming, and we spoke with the company themselves, and we heard kind of a few of the sectors that they had interest in, and then we ran from there and we looked into those sectors and we saw a few things that we thought might need some aid, and from there it just progressed as we went by each week.
Yeah, the bulk of it was, I think, idea generation. And so Dr. Smogard and this company, they were encouraging us throughout a long period of this project to keep thinking about new ideas, keep exploring new routes and everything. And so that did take up a lot of time, but as we said, that was kind of what was so fun about it, is that we got to explore all of these different kinds of projects that we could really put a hand into and hopefully have one pan out. And then eventually we sort of moved from this idea generation to picking a couple that we were really interested in and the company was really interested in, focusing on developing the research on it. So the actual like quantitative analysis of what's the return on investment for this type of project, how much money does need to go into it, how much time are these resources available in this country or within this company. And then we eventually sort of synthesized this all into the written and the oral report that was given to the company at the end of this semester.
Abby, you've touched a few times on like mentioning how you were tailoring the project to the country. Could you guys talk a little bit more about what it was like to work in an international setting, whether that was just with like communications and logistics, or how that actually helped you shape the project?
I think it gave us like a driving direction to move into because, like I said, the values that we had come in expecting to really hold throughout the project they had to be changed really to fit the needs of this country. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, and going off of that, my experience personally, because I was in charge of communications, the biggest part for me was just making sure that those were done well in advance at proper times. And then, understanding that if I'm reaching out at 6 p.m. here, it's 6 a.m. there. So I'm not going to get a response for quite a bit of time, but it's just because that's what it is, working with an international company with such a large time gap. And then we did have a few language barriers, but it really wasn't anything too extreme. But again, just understanding that or having to ask again, could you clarify?
That kind of takes me to my next question is, did you guys encounter any like cultural barriers, like anything that you weren't expecting? What kind of countries did you work with?
So we were working with the Philippines. Cultural barrier-wise, another important implication of the project was just understanding how what we're putting out is going to work with the country and the differences. So we had to take into understanding, the government and how the government works and how this company plays a role with that country that we're working with and kind of what they can and cannot do in terms of change. So there was a lot of first-hand understanding of just how things work because they are a lot different than here.
Dr. Smogard, why do you think it's important for students now to be working in this international environment? How do you think it helps them develop their skills?
Well, before I answer that, I'm going to go back and compliment both Alison and Abby because the project they're talking about, we're working with the Philippines, which is a big country, and I can tell you that the work that these two students did was outstanding in terms of the depth, and they were in areas of kind of looking at resilience and lots of ways because the poor Philippines is impacted by a lot of different kinds of natural disasters and so on. So they were working on everything from I think Alison became a mangrove expert in terms of looking at that, and Abby was great in terms of putting together a lot of stuff on the cribs, and maybe they can talk a little bit more about that in terms of just landscaping and things that they put together. But I think one thing that sometimes gets overlooked, and they both actually went through it, is that one of the things about when you work with one country doesn't mean you're limited to just looking at that country, because a lot of things that I encourage them to do are looking at best practices, for example, global best practices. So that means they're typically not only working with, in this case, the Philippines, but they were looking at different things in different parts of the world. So they both came up to support their recommendations with, well, we found this in India, or we found this in Thailand, or we found this in another country. So the bottom line is not only do they get exposure to the country we're working with, but they get exposure to a lot of other countries and best practices. But back to your question to answer that, I think that, in a global situation like where we are today, I think it's very important to just, have access to, looking at different cultures, looking at different things linguistically, looking at different regulations and regulatory issues, because what we may think, this will work really well here in the United States may not work very well. And so the idea, it just really gives them an opportunity to expand and look at lots of different things. And maybe just to give you an example of some of the other projects we've worked on to some of the other students' groups, one thing I did forget to mention is when we launched the international piece of that, I was actually working with USF World, and they were looking at ways to engage with international alumni. And so when we first kicked this course off on the global side, we actually started to work and reach out to international alumni-owned companies. And so we had companies, we worked with companies, I know a couple of digital marketing agencies in Amsterdam and Paris who are looking at expanding in the European Union. We looked at a company in Canada was looking at developing a new hospitality brand for millennial travelers. We looked at a technology platform in Sweden that was looking to expand. And then we also expanded to non-alumni-owned companies as well. We worked with a startup in Belize who was looking at developing a hair care product based on organic seaweed, and they were launching in the Caribbean. So each project is unique, each country is unique, but it all comes down to, again, just exposure to international environment, I think, is really valuable. Consulting in general is really valuable, I think, for creating skill sets for the future. But if you have an overlay of international on top of that, it really, I think, is kind of a very dynamic set of opportunities. And I think hopefully they both enjoyed that exposure as well.
Mm-hmm. I love the point that you brought up about best practices. I think that it's really important when you're thinking about something on an international, global scale to look at how other countries are doing things, because oftentimes other places are doing things better than you are. So I think it's really important to look at, how is the best doing this and how can we improve, or how can we make it a little bit different. So I really like that.
And I think, too, a lot of times at the end, the client, we refer to the company as the client, wants you to justify why you're making the recommendations. And so since we are not experts, they're the experts, and we're there coming to provide recommendations, which could be new, innovative, maybe something that we're not as familiar with as they are. But when you can kind of say, well, we know that there are best practices and bring them to the table, and they both came up with some outstanding examples of best practices. And I think that also provides the client with saying, boy, they've done the research and they can defend their presentations and outcomes and recommendations. And it's also eye-opening because a lot of these companies don't have, they're working in the day-to-day operation. They don't have a chance to survey necessarily and do the research that our teams can do. So I think they see that as a nice value-added component as well.
And the research is almost like, at least from my experience, was such a cool part of the process because it's like your interests are kind of marrying with like this investigative process. And like at that point, the project starts to almost like take shape itself because of what you can do and what you should do, start to show up in like the things that you're finding.
I think it's really good that you got to, do the research. And like you were saying, you got to compare it to different countries that were actually like already implementing that. I also wanted to ask if there was like a really impactful moment throughout the whole process that really impacted you. You could talk about like at the conclusion or whenever.
I would say the final presentation to the company was very impactful just because getting to see the reactions from all the higher ups and everyone that was invited to the presentation and to see how happy they were with our findings and our recommendations, it was really rewarding. And I do feel that our research is going to pay off. It was nice to see that the company liked what we had come up with. They liked how we backed our research, and it was nice to see that this again was a real world project that is potentially going to be used.
Yeah, I agree. The final presentation, that sort of coming together and having that moment of like, wow, we made this. And we're at the point now where we've put everything together and we've put in all of this work, and now we're ready to give it to this company. And so as Dr. Smogard said before, we actually were able to present it sort of like in a trial run to some other individuals, and getting feedback from that and them saying, wow, like we can really tell that you guys put in a lot of work. That's really rewarding when we have dedicated a lot of time and a lot of effort into putting all of this into that presentation. And so that was definitely the moment of like, this is all paying off now.
And I'll add just another compliment, too, in terms of the lead that was working with directly on the client side, made a comment that he said that he sits in a lot of board meetings, and he said this presentation was as good, if not better, than some of the board meeting presentations he's seen. So that's a compliment to this team.
Wow.
And some of the folks are not here as well. We had a team of 6, did we not? So
yes, and that was quite a compliment to
That's a
hear
big compliment.
from, the company executives. So again, it was just really rewarding.
So you guys, you had such a successful project and you got all this great feedback and that was so rewarding to you guys. How did this process as a whole like shape, your idea or opinion of, working internationally in the future?
I think it kind of just opened my mind to not even just internationally, but just exploring like new places and interacting with individuals from different backgrounds. So even just within our group, we were a very multidisciplinary group, as we have said. And then this company was are composed of individuals who had such a variety of backgrounds professionally, educationally. And so I think putting yourself in those types of situations are the times when you're going to learn the most, both about other cultures and other business practices, but also like about yourself and where you fit into that.
I agree. Yeah, I learned a lot from the project, especially because it was an international one. And then also adding in wanting to go into law in the future, I have considered international aspects of the legal field. So it was just very interesting to see how, communications are done and the type of companies that we work with that are, based in the US per se, but also do a lot of work globally. So it was just very interesting to see how everything kind of works. And I did really enjoy communicating with the company.
Dr. Smogard, what is next for the future of the Global Consulting Capstone course?
Well, I don't think I would change much. I think, like I said, each situation is very unique and distinct. I think one thing we have talked about with Dr. Lanier, who's our campus dean, and there's a shout out to her as well. She's been a great supporter of this project all the way along. We've talked about maybe considering having a study abroad add-on to this afterwards, where you could actually take the students who have looked at that, presented a project, and actually set it up so they could actually go physically to the country and actually spend some time with the client organization to see if that could work out. So that's been talked about. I don't think we've advanced it very far yet, but that's something new. Otherwise, I don't think I would change much. I'm very happy with the experiences, and like I said, each one is unique and distinct. So I'm not sure I'd make many changes.
That would be a really incredible opportunity to be able to study abroad.
Yes.
Now, lastly, for students considering taking this course in the future, what advice would you give them, and how do you think they can make the most of this really hands-on course?
I would say have as much of an open mind as possible. Don't think that any one idea you may have is not something that could potentially be at the end of the project. And to also utilize your group as much as possible, communicate with your group members as much as possible, and really work as a team to develop a well-rounded deliverable.
Yeah, I think this course was a really great opportunity to grow. So just kind of encourage other students to put yourself out there into maybe a field that you're not familiar with, maybe something that's a little bit uncomfortable, because that's where you learn and where you grow. So now I'm exposed to a completely new side of professional work, and I've made connections both with Dr. Smogard and this company, but also with my group members, because we grew rather close over this experience. We had to work together, but it also grew sort of into more of like a personal sense. So like we got to know each other and what we all want to do and everything. And it was really rewarding overall.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd be open to be flexible. I think that's it in terms of just, take a chance and see what happens.
And the course is offered every fall semester.
It has been offered every semester so far. So that may change in the future. You never know. But that's the pattern it's been so far.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. It's been great getting to learn more about the Global Student Consulting course. Thank you all so much for joining us on today's episode.
Thank you for having us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, Caroline, we are back in the studio, and that was such a great podcast. What'd you think?
I think my favorite part was just hearing the students talk about like their personal project. Like they really just like their eyes were lit up, and like you could tell how much they invested in the project, but also like that it really meant something to them. It wasn't just a class. It was actually something that they got to like make their own.
Right, and they got that hands-on experience with a real company that's in a different part of the world, completely different from what they're used to. Even if you do internships here in the United States, you're not getting that other, the global context that they're getting. So I think that's a really good opportunity for honor students that are interested in business, interested in consulting, or just like doing something different.
And if you're interested in taking that course, don't forget to check the Honor Roll newsletter and our website at usf.edu/honors for all upcoming events, updates, and news. That'll do it for this week's episode. The Honor Roll podcast is recorded in the Judy Genshaft Honors College at the University of South Florida Tampa campus. Production assistance is provided by honor student Sandra Napolitano. Thank you all so much for listening. please do not forget to rate and review our podcast. We appreciate your feedback. Please join us next week to hear about what we're up to at the Judy Genshaft Honors College.
Until next time, go Bulls!